All right, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Barbershop, where we're here chopping it up. DYCD's Barbershop. We're in our new year. We're moving fastly. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about community transformation. Once again, at the beginning of the year, everyone has all these different uh, I guess restitutions they say they make, and I'm gonna change this, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna lose this COVID weight, I'm gonna start reading books, I'm going to pray more, I'm going to do. We talk about a lot of things we do, and often by next month, March, we're not doing none of it. But we want to talk about community transformation and how we can really transform our communities into what we hope them to be. A lot of times, a lot of things that are happening across the country, we have the opportunity to start fresh at the beginning of this year. There's a lot of things that are happening, a lot of new opportunities. And I think that we have to figure out in our communities, how do we take advantage of it? How do we make sure that we can make our communities what we really honestly want them to be? So I have my great host that is hosting with me here in the barbershop. And I'm going to introduce in order as we always do. I'm going to turn over to Jerry. Hey, Jerry, how you doing?
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm good, excited about our conversation today about transformation, not just within ourselves, but within our communities. My name is, again, Jerry Hippolyte, Deputy Director at DYCD, and I come from the mental health lens as a mental health ambassador. I'm going to take this opportunity to pass it on to one of our other hosts, who I call a brother, Mike Bobbitt. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Scott. Mike Bobbitt, Acting Deputy Commissioner for Community Development at DYCD. So I get to work with Scott all the time. I'm glad due to barbershops, I get to chop it up and interact with Jerry all the time now too. And we're pulling in other people around the agency. If you've been following this series for a while, we had this brother on before. I'm glad that he's got a chair. He's open for business. He got a bunch of chairs behind him too, and he brought guests with him. We got Associate Commissioner for Youth Services and Strategic Partnerships, Daryl Rattree. Daryl, welcome back to the Barbershop.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jerry. I'm looking forward to tonight's conversation. And as you said, I have some folks with me. So I want to definitely introduce you first to Renita Francois. Take it away. Oh, Renita, you're on mute.
I'm muted. Amateur Zoom mistake after almost a year in this situation. Good evening. My name is Renita Francois. Daryl said I'm the Executive Director of the Mayor's Action Plan for Neighborhood Safety at the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. Thanks for having me, guys.
No problem, Renita. And thank you for that early reminder of to be mindful of our mute buttons. That was purposeful. Next, we have up Jessica Moffield.
Good evening, guys, and happy Tuesday. I am Jessica Moffield, the Executive Director, of the Office to Prevent Gun Violence in the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening, and I'm looking forward to chopping it up in the shop.
Thank you, Jessica. And also we have Alvin Foster with us. Hey, Alvin.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Daryl. My name is Alvin Foster. I'm a director in the NYPD Community Affairs Bureau, and happy to be here tonight to be a part of this conversation.
Thanks, Daryl. You rolled deep. You got 3 guests with you. That's pretty dope. I'm going to introduce one of my guests, and then I'm going to turn it over to Scott because I know you have someone that you want to introduce too. This is a good buddy of mine. He works hard, so I never really get to see him these days anymore, but we go back from our college days, and he has cleaned himself up very, very nicely, as I've tried to as well. As a adjunct professor at New York Law School, I present to you, ladies and gentlemen, Alvin Bragg. Take it away.
Y'all see, I'm trying to keep up with Mike with the gray and the beard. He got me beat a little bit. Yeah, so happy to be here with y'all tonight with DYCD folks. I'm an alum of the city, used to run the litigation for the city council. I'm now, down the virtual street at New York Law School, where I teach criminal law classes and co-run our racial justice projects. So work on a lot of the issues like gun issues, youth enrichment issues, and racial issues relating to the criminal justice system. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I'm going to introduce my good friend that I'm getting to know very, very well. And we've been to meetings a lot this month, back and forth together. And I'm going to introduce Jahar Rose. Go ahead.
Hey, this is Jahai Rose. I'm the Deputy Director of Outreach and Intergovernmental Affairs at the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Can't wait to get into this discussion and chop it up with all of you in the barbershop.
So, first question coming out the gate. Anybody, just what does community transformation mean to you, and where would you start at transforming a community? Where would you start? Anyone, just jump in and go.
I'm gonna jump in real quick, and I want to say I'm glad that we started this thing this year, which we kicked off last month, where we are now starting to do series. So last month we spent a lot of time, and if people checked in with us last month, we talked about personal transformation. So if you're following along with us, we've already talked for a couple of hours about this idea of transformation. So I'm layering on top of that. I'm vibing off of what we spoke about before. When I think about community, I think about my household, who's in my family, and I think about my extended family, right? That could be my blood relatives, right? But just who do I consider to be my people, my tribe? So when we have been talking about transformation, and a lot of it was looking within, when I start thinking about community, I think about who do I need to be thinking about and looking out for, as well as who is in my tribe, who's in my group, who's trying to look out for me. That's how I'm seeing it right now, but I want to hear what others think as well.
I'm gonna follow up with Mike right there. I love where you led off with. When I see community, or I think of community transformation, I'm thinking of cultural transformation. You know, you're the sum of the closest 5 people around you, right? And so what does that look like? And creating that synergy and that mindset to move to move in lock and step with each other to create that type of change from internal all the way to the external, because there's no external success without internal development. So having that just be synchronized as a group of people, that's when I'm really seeing and feeling the energy of transformation. So that's my mindset. I'll start it off with our panelists. Darryl, you want to take a crack at this?
Dealing with a situation outside with the car. So good. Come back to me next round.
You got it.
That's
So we bring it to any of the panelists. When you hear community transformation, what is the first thought that pops into your mind?
I can go while he figures out his car troubles. When I think of transformation, I think of healing, I think of evolution, I think of thriving, I think of resilience. Like, all of those things are necessary in order for people and communities to transform. Without that collective process of healing through past traumas, we remain a stagnant community. We remain a stagnant tribe. I see Renita said he got the the Teddy Riley car parts. But that's, and also joy, right? I think without those things in our community, it's hard for us to move as a unit. It's hard for us to move as a collective. In seeing that there's support in our tribes, there's connectivity, etc. So yeah, yep. And not having the Teddy Riley vibes, that's all about transformation. So I think all of those things are necessary.
Yeah, I'll go. I think, transformation is an internal and an external exercise. So I think it's great that you guys led off talking about personal transformation, and community transformation. To me is, the work that we have to do internally as a community, the resources and the political power and, the personal agency that we have to amass, but also it's about our capacity for change and to evolve. I think that one of the things, especially about our community, that we struggle with is this always fighting against not being able to be who other people want us to be, and really digging into the immense just value and capital that we possess as a community, to let that speak for itself. It's just constantly this battle with exterior, narratives, because narratives are a very important part of transformation as well, because you have to do certain things, and you have to be viewed a certain way for that transformation to really take hold. People like to use that phrase, perception is reality. And I think that that's something that we really have to overcome, and we can. And it's about owning our personal narratives and being able to tell our own story. And I think that we've been doing that, even through immense struggle with COVID and with all of the other isms and pandemics that we've been dealing with. We're still managing to still tell our stories in this time. And I think that's powerful.
Hey, Jerry, I'm back. I had to run out real quick, put money in the meter. I'm
Nice,
back now.
nice.
But, so for me, community transformation, you know what? For me, and this is cliche, but it's about how do we get back? I think deep down inside everyone, we have this remembrance of it taking a village to raise a child. And the definition of that village is in everybody. Whoever you talk to, they know what that means. It's cliche. And I think for me, community transformation is figuring out what do we collectively have to do to get back to that point, and all of the outcomes and milestones that came along with it. The ability for anyone within that village to speak to each other, having that trust of each other, having that connection, that sort of almost partnership within the community. So for me, I love what Renita said. From every aspect of it, what does it take for us to start building the blocks to get there?
And it's great because now, when you said that, I used to think about in my community where I grew up, where even though we didn't have cell phones, information got home quicker than you did. That for some reason, whatever you did on the block or you did in the street, by the time you got home, your parents already knew. And they'd be like, question like, how was your day? You knew as soon as you know you busted.
Yeah. Just give me butterflies.
But it was that community that watched out and looked out for everybody. You really knew your community. You knew the people in the grocery store. You knew people at the barbershop. You knew people at church. You knew everybody in your community, and people knew you. And they knew like, oh, that's Carolyn's son. What you doing down there? You ain't supposed to be down there. I know your mama. So how do we? I don't know if we can go back to that, but once again, in the honoring of Black History Month, we even talk about we had the Black Wall Street, where our communities were thriving financially as a unit. Everybody knew each other. We loved each other. We kept into each other. Is that something that's realistic, even going back to something of that nature, or is that already lost and gone?
You say Black Wall Street, and just thinking about it takes me in different directions. Like I remember at my church, we did a project for the kids because it's about the centennial now, I think, maybe 101 years of the massacre in Tulsa, where you had that perfectly self-sufficient, well-functioning Black community in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And some people just couldn't stand to see those people be happy, and they ran through that community. It was really, really, really terrible. So I don't know if you can go back, because you can't go back in time. But what I'm wondering about, and other panelists may have a different view, but I'm wondering what can you take forward, And so one of the things, this doesn't come up that much at work, but like in my personal life, like I'm one of those people that doesn't let Kwanzaa go. There's some people like that celebrate Kwanzaa, and other people that advocate for Kwanzaa, and other people like, why do we still have Black History Month? Why are we still doing Kwanzaa? Blah, blah, right? But like, every day I'm asking people, particularly when we get to like day 3, day 4, when you're talking about cooperative economics and you're talking about working together, and I'll always try and pick different examples or principles of stuff that's happening now that still reflects that spirit. Like where did someone go out of their way to create opportunity locally, social opportunity, cultural opportunity, but particularly economic opportunity? Like I refuse to let that go.
So the one thing that I noticed in the example that you just gave, in the sense of like Black Wall Street, was that I started watching like maybe like a year and a half ago, right? I saw this one Black comedian that was doing these short skits, right? So the skits are probably no longer than 3 or 4 minutes, right? And the cast would be like 3 or 4 other Black people in the cast, right? And then I looked at that cast, and I'm like, these individuals are really funny together. And then I looked at another aspect, and it was like, this one has their own show, and that one has their own show, and this other one has their own show. From that show, they have another cast, and each one of those individuals has their own channel and their own show. So I say that to say this is that I think the transformation is happening, right? To some extent, we are now really learning that the connectivity between each other is necessary for us to be able to grow and foster something that was greater than what we may have had 10 years ago, right? Because each individual gains a certain level of notoriety from their exposure that the previous individual gives. Now they have their own audience. And what I'm seeing more frequently is that they're expanding that audience amongst each one, collectively working together, advertising for each other, so that these individuals have an ability to be able to say, you know, we are a network. So I think if that could happen with individuals that literally are everyday individuals now on YouTube, I think that same energy is happening with individuals locally as well. I think it's just a microcosm of what's actually happening in our societies. It may not happen to the expansion that we want it to happen in, but I do believe I see it happening, where individuals are taking something small and they're really branching out and really trying to benefit each other in a way where everybody can eat and everybody can be prosperous.
And I'm wondering if we're going to see renewed emphasis on that. And Mike was mentioning his church project after this kind of, you know, period of COVID, because I feel like one thing that a lot of folks I'm talking to is the things, the basic things, like, you know, going to church every Sunday and seeing folks, right? Like, we miss that, the connection, right? Frankly, you know, coworkers, right? I mean, I assume y'all all working virtual and don't see each other all the time. And so I think some of the community structures that we were relying on but were taken for granted, we are going to appreciate more, and hopefully that will mean we'll lean into them and strengthen them. That's kind of my hope as we hopefully emerge later this year and get back into some of our critical institutions that we need to really help build up. Hopefully we'll come back with renewed vigor.
Yeah.
One thing I want to hold on down. Well, go ahead, down.
Mine is quick. Just connecting with Jahai and Alvin is saying, like, I can see now where in my work, I need to create forums where people who connected and did something are being held up, and a discussion's happening with them in the community settings. Like, we can bring this to young adults. We can bring that practice in. We can find it. I think a lot of times folks don't talk about it. They may have opened up a store somewhere in the neighborhood and no one's talking about it. They opened up an actual barbershop. No one's talking about it. Everyone knows about it. And I think at one point we need to elevate them and show that, no, this is something to strive for. This is actually something to achieve.
On that note, Darryl, I want to add that if I'm correct, we're all basically community employees. We all do work around the community in our aspect of work in some way or another that's on this panel. That's why we wanted this panel together. So from our seat where we sit at, how can we help start doing, or what are we doing to help transforming our communities? I know, like, working in CSBG, working with anti-poverty, I love that where I'm working hard to try to pull people out of poverty and giving them tools and skills that they can live a little bit above where they're at, or they can change their lifestyle. And to me, it's great when you see somebody that has lifted up and they're doing a little bit better than when you first met them. They may not be doing the greatest, but you can see that they have moved up a level. That really inspires me and keeps me wanting to come to work every day, because I'm helping somebody in this community at large. Does anybody else have those feelings, or what are we doing in our seats as employees? Because we're taking the city money from our community. What are we putting back in the community also?
I want to jump in real quick, keying off of what you said and going back to what Darryl was saying a little bit too, right? So part of what I'm thinking about and what I'm struck by in the conversation is really it's what Jahai said before when he was mentioning YouTube, and it made me think about, and we were thinking about this a little bit, talking about this a little bit before, like, we've actually created a community because we're having these conversations. So he mentioned YouTube, and we're actually using YouTube right now. So I wouldn't say that I'm torn. I would say rather my attention is split on two things, like what's happening day to day out in the world, like out on the block or in the office, like that's why when Keon, what Daryl said, like I miss interacting with colleagues that ordinarily we would see each other every day. And I had a team meeting yesterday. Obviously, Scott, you were in the meeting. We're saying just like water cooler conversation and people sharing ideas while they're by the copier. It's been, because the way we've had to adapt practice is a year since people, well, no, March will be a year since we've been able to focus in those ways. But we have, we staff are still going out in the field, they're still observing the programs, they're just not using the office in the same way, right? We still have to be productive and make good on what you were saying. So it's not like things aren't happening in the community. We have to still be in the community. We just have to do it safely. And so, the internet and social media and telephone and, just other ways that we can engage. And that's why I was struck by what Jai was saying. Like, you can create your tribe and you can connect with other tribes, and that can be part of your community too. But I'll say this, and then I'll jump off to respond to what you say. I feel like I'm a supporter of what you're doing, Scott, and what other colleagues like Daryl and Jerry and other folks are doing to make sure the public's money is being spent well. And sometimes that's working with folks who go to the bus stop or outside Home Depot in the middle of the pandemic and say, hey, brother, you need some help, right? Like, I know we have programs that even in the middle of the pandemic, they're like, all right, well, mask up, but I still got to go to whatever it is, because that's where there is someone who is in need. That work has to happen, just like there's this other work now that can happen that we are doing where people are, like we're using YouTube, other folks are using social media to connect people. I don't think you can do all of one or all of the other. I think that we have to continue to find ways to embrace both.
Yeah, and I think to Mike, to your point, being able to use Zoom and Microsoft Teams. I won't call myself an expert yet, but getting used to that world to connect internally, but also working with external partners and organizations to see how we can still bring resources to people in the community. And I think most organizations have found other ways to connect with the public, and being able to have those conversations and partner with them to still service the people of the city, I think has been a challenge in the beginning, but I think to some extent we're all working through it.
Hey guys, I saw Jessica's mic go off. Go ahead, Jessica. Wait, Jessica, we can't.
Can you hear me?
We hear you now.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, in thinking about our work, I think the intention, the impact has always been who we're accountable to, and we're accountable to our communities. So the work that, Renita and myself is centered and rooted in is finding innovation to incubate during this time to still connect, because although we're separate, like kinship still exists in ways that may have been strengthened in this time if it did not happen in this way. So, when we talk about having, over 500,000 PPE supplies collectively being distributed into community, when we talk about, educating and having direct messaging towards, folks, young people, that at one point did not believe that COVID was actually a thing. And we understand that in our communities. And when I mean our communities, I mean Black and Brown communities, that there's disproportionate effects of everything, not only of the pandemic, not only of the health indexes, not only of gun violence. All of these things, are super compounded and affect our communities in very, very complex ways. So, and understanding what that is, a part of transforming community is really access to capital. I think we kind of say resources a little bit loosely, but it's, what does that look like? Yes, we have the social capital in terms of humans and like people being present and like basic humanity, but that access to capital and like fiduciary funds and actually having a change in legitimacy where community is trusted with making decisions for that money is important. And I think that's what we kind of see with the work of ONS, not only with having public safety strategies that are led by a community in terms of like violence intervention and healing practices, but also how we show up and create space. So I think those things are important. Renita, I see your mic is off. You want to jump in?
Yeah, just to, to echo what somebody echoing me.
Said echo.
To echo what you're saying, I think that an important part about transformation is not just about it's about all the things that we've been talking about, but it's also about power and influence. And the reason why I bring that to the table is because if you look at all of us, and everyone has their fancy title and their position, I think that it speaks to, and we see in New York City, a transformation in the way that government operates and even the level of access that people of color have at this time. And I think that part of that is a reflection of just the number of people with this lived experience who are in the positions that they're in. And I stress that because I think we see two different parts of our community, and we're amongst family, so we're just talking. I think that we have, one aspect where we see, possibly gatekeeping, is it this attitude that, I'm the only one now, I've got to my position and it's great, celebrate me and what I'm doing. And on the other hand, you have folks who are like, let me get as high up and as dug in as I can so that I can open those doors and bring my community with me. Because there is a systemic issue that we're dealing with here. We went from slavery to Reconstruction to Jim Crow, segregation, mass incarceration. It's just a continuous cycle of trying to figure out how we can actually be full participants in this American dream that we're all chasing after. And so when it comes to community transformation, of course, there are things that we can personally do and things that Black people have always done to elevate themselves, with or without the support of government. But I think the opportunity that we have in this moment, to the question that Scott asked about what we are doing for our community and with the community's money, I think representation matters. And the fact that we are able to give as much or create as much access to funding as we are, especially in our work through the Office of Neighborhood Safety, either to local community-based organizations or directly to residents themselves, for them to really lift up their voices as leaders and experts in their communities and the challenges they face, I think is critically important. And I don't know that that's the direction we would be going if we didn't have people who understood the value of that and the value of that experience.
Oh, you said a lot. You said a lot, and I appreciate it. And I want to key off of just a couple of things that I got from what you were saying. So one, the power of representation. And I think I'm getting your vibe too. Like, I'm not really tripping on people's fancy titles so much as if those of us in this group, those of us listening, other conversations we had, have tried to use whatever positions we've had to try to increase influence and try to get other issues that maybe have been under addressed or gone unaddressed to be inserted as part of the agenda. And I do certainly feel that that's part of my charge. It may overtly be my responsibility, but even if it wasn't, I try to bring it to my work in ways that I think I can manage and pull off. The other thing that you said, well, there are many things you said. The two other quick things that I want to touch on is one, my perception of movers versus shakers. That's one, so I don't want to forget that. But the other is just a quick history for me. When I came to DYCD, one thing that was really important to me as I was determining did I even really want the first job that I had there is I looked at the leadership, and there was a Latinx woman, a former commissioner, the Dominican woman. I said, all right, well, if the city has figured out that a woman of color should be running this agency, maybe I can have a good shot doing what I think my job should be at this agency. So it was really super important for me to see representation at the highest levels. And I certainly have felt by having an Asian gentleman as our commissioner in this BIPOC agenda, there's a lot of things that I hope he gets. I think he gets. I think he signals that he gets. Daryl, you can weigh in on that as well, where we would have these same conversations no matter who the big boss was, but sometimes the conversations can be a little bit shorter, a little bit more focused, and can be accelerated because you're scaffolding based on prior conversations, prior knowledge. And then this last thing I want to hit real quick, when I said movers versus shakers, I've long had this notion, which for me helped, it was crystallized a little bit when I used to work at the Vera Institute of Justice. So quick plug about Vera, as I see it anyway. They will be very successful working in state governments around criminal justice issues and reform issues when you've got three things. One, there's a public safety or criminal justice issue, a need that needs to be addressed. Two, somebody has some money to do something about it. And three, there's someone already in government on the inside who wants to do, quote, the right thing. And I would talk to some colleagues when I was there about whether people were comfortable working in that environment in that way. Some people's advocacy is, well, the whole system is terrible. We need to burn down the whole system. This whole thing is ridiculous. When I was at Vera, that was not the Vera approach. So what crystallized from my thinking is, in the community, you've got to have movers and you got to have shakers. And the shakers are the people who will be outside the building saying, I don't even like this institution. You need to burn this whole thing down. And the movers look, well, I think they want to burn down the whole institution. Maybe if we enact thus and so practice, these protocols, these policies, maybe we can get at some of the, oh, you think so? Yeah, no, I think maybe if we try some of these kinds, okay. And part of the open secret is the movers and the shakers know each other. So the movers know, look, when you say such and such a thing, all right, cool. And if we can't make good on it, I can't help what you're going to do. But let me at least try this and negotiate with you. So I've sort of carried that with me since, I don't know, 2000, whatever, when I came up with the idea. And I think it informs the way that I see what my work or my colleagues' work is anyway. But others may have a different take on it.
I love that. I got like three threads of thought in my head. One, I'll go with one. I'll go with this. As we do this work in city government, and I gotta be careful now, right? As we do this work in city government, as we get to the point where we want to make change, you start to see where those lines were, and you make the decision. No, I'm crossing that line, like because it only makes sense for me to do it. And then you realize that, all right, I crossed that line, and you see, you recognize what that risk was. And then you look back and question, well, why didn't anyone cross it before? Because obviously the risk wasn't that detrimental to me moving forward and me being able to do what we do. I think for us, the collective, it's keeping that goal, that outcome in the back of everything, the back of our minds on everything we do. That we do need to provide access to folks, that we do need to break in the barriers, no matter how small, how big, and make actual change.
So one of the things that I appreciate regarding that sense of change is that, and keeping in the hopes and keeping in the conversation with Black history, is that, having a second look regarding how we approach police accountability, right? Long time ago, a lot of individuals would have a conversation about police accountability that sounded like that was just an oxymoron, right? The two really don't make any sense with each other, right? But hopefully, and really through a lot of grassroots movement and a lot of collective conversation, now I think we're really starting to reassess how we hold police officers accountable for misconduct. So those things being consistent, I think with the work that I do specifically is hopefully puts into that conversation what is an individual's part in holding police officers accountable for bad behavior. So all those things being consistent, the CCRB, when I go out and we conduct presentations for members of the public, I think the way that we help to try to transform communities is to let them know there is a way to actually hold police officers accountable for misconduct. And interestingly enough, the CCRB was put into effect by the only Black mayor of the city of New York, the late Mayor David Dinkins. So, we take great pride in being able to go into communities and notify them of, what, if this happens, this is what you have an ability to do. This is your recourse. Guess what? There is something called the Right to Know Act, where a police officer is supposed to conduct themselves a very specific way. And if that's not the way that the officer has conducted themselves, there is a way for you to be able to make a complaint about how this officer has conducted themselves. So in the work that we do, we try to ensure that we're as diverse as possible regarding going into communities. So homeless shelters, New York City Housing Authority, after school programs, alternative to incarceration programs, English as a second language programs. We're trying to ensure that as many different individuals, as many different groups are brought into this conversation as much as possible, because no one should be in this position to be unaware of the fact that there is accountability for police officers, especially when it comes to those vulnerable populations that are likely to consistently come into interactions with New York City police officers?
No, and I have to jump in there as well. I think being in the police department since I was a kid, starting off in DYCD Summer Youth Employment Program, I noticed over the years that we're not the same department. The NYPD is not the same department that I interned at 14 years old. It's definitely, I would definitely say under this administration, under this mayor, the last few police commissioners we have made, we moved that needle very, very far. And I think, with the agreement that the MOU we have with CCRB as far as discipline is concerned, I think we are moving forward. But I also think too, we also need community, I think, to be able to have these conversations. I think the conversation tonight is amazing that, we are all successful in this call. We all have a different role in community in a sense, but I think, how do we get more conversations like this where we're talking with each other, we can share ideas and be able to work together? Because I think at the end of the day, all folks in New York City especially, we all kind of want the same thing, right? We all want to be kept safe. We all want to be able to raise our families and things like that. So I think having more conversations like this where we can share ideas and it's going to help us move forward. But in the last couple of years, to see how far we have came in policing and community engagement, I think we are on a path to really make some more change. And I'm sure more changes are going to happen in the city. So I think that's amazing.
So I guess I'm the only non-government worker right now. I've spent 15 years in government at the city level as a federal prosecutor. Then I was at the New York Attorney General's office. And I wanted to go talk this from the perspective of someone who's no longer in government. And when I was in government, facing a lot of the decisions you're all thinking about and where to kind of how to govern. And then now, the last two folks who spoke, I've had interactions, with their agencies, the CCRB. I testified in front of the CCRB on your regs about a month ago on whether you can get jurisdiction for officers who don't tell the truth in connection with your proceedings, and the CCRB wanted. So I testified in favor of that reg and also the sexual assault regs. So I think for those who are particularly alums of government, lending our experience and a voice in a way that particularly may not have been, depending upon who your leader was at a particular time, but to lend your experience, and then I'm currently litigating against the NYPD, representing Eric Garner's family, trying to get transparency there, and we just filed papers. So I think that there's an expertise you develop in government, that you can apply as an alum of government to really help push in a particular way, informed by your time in government, and that's what I've been trying to do during my couple of years out. But certainly, I spent 15 years in city, state, and federal government, and I do think that the power of those seats and the judicious use of those power is great to see. Folks like us in those seats and what we can do with them.
So I want to pause for a second and remind our viewers who are online. You can put questions in the chat, and we'll get to your questions also. So don't hesitate, and if you are enjoying this conversation, because I see quite a few people on, if there's something that resonates with you, put it in the chat, and we'll try to get to it. Okay. So great questions, and one thing I was just thinking about. I remember when I worked at the PAL, the Police Athletic League, and how much fun we had working with the officers in the community. And I'm a diehard 28 precinct kind of a guy, because they spoiled me when I was in Harlem. So I really remember the great things about working with the officers. And and I know officers don't walk the beat anymore, but that was a really great experience where you got to interact with, talk with the kids and stuff like that. And I was really spoiled. I guess I'm taking it a little out of context, because the first year I was at PAL, I had police officers assigned to my building. So officers would come up to me and say, Miss Scott, can you tell the commander that I need to work in the building next week? So I would put them on the list, and they would do their tour in the building. And the kids would play basketball and hockey, and shoot pool and watch TV together. And these kids just learned police officers were great people. How do we get back to that type of relationship in the community where that there is no this or that, or we're just great people?
So I do agree with the notion that in any relationship, a part of that relationship is reciprocity, right? In that reciprocity, you want to believe that in accountability, that if I can be held accountable, so can the other individual, right? That lack of trust then starts to diminish when you believe all of the accountability is on one side and unfortunately not on the other side. So those things being consistent, I think a part of the conversation is building trust by ensuring that there's accountability for bad behavior. So I think that's a part of it. If individuals really believe that there is a respectful relationship between both sides, I think that does start to, I believe that does start to build a trust between two sides, because they realize that bad behavior is not something that's acceptable. You get what I'm saying? So all those things being consistent, I believe that's a part or component of building back that relationship, because the relationship is fractured because of trust. Individuals believe that there's no accountability on one side and it's only accountability on our side. So I believe that through a process of ensuring that, one, policies are more fair, two, accountability is there, the things that outrage people are actually responded to in a fair and measured response, that's going to build that relationship back. Because to be honest, if an individual fears the fact of contacting the police department for anything, then unfortunately you're going to get into a space where individuals will, one, take matters into their own hands, but two, that as that relationship gets fractured, it only becomes more fractured. And then when we see some levels of resistance to accountability, where I'm like, my neighborhood, about 5 or 6 years ago, an individual took the life of an officer, and the individuals that turned that individual in was that community. You get what I'm saying? So where that relationship is, where that community is concerned, the police department now realizes that, you know what, if it gets down to the fray, we know we can count on this community. If individuals don't feel that same reciprocity, that conversation is going to be, okay, so when your side does something wrong, it's okay. But when our side does something wrong, you come to us for help. You get what I'm saying? So that being the case, I think that reciprocity is definitely something that's helpful to be able to rebuild that relationship. And then hopefully once we get past the healing process, we should be able to get to a better relationship where police officers and members of the community feel more intertwined as one community, opposed to there being a us and a them.
I have something quick, but I think Jessica was in queue before me.
So what's coming up for me, right? Renita, you want to go, or?
No, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
What's coming up for me right now is like this overarching theme of institutional authority, right? Regardless of whether it's the police department, it's government structures, telling community how they should live, how they should be, how they should act, without respecting the humanity that already exists within that structure. That's one. Two is also recognizing that, in order to get to a place of reciprocity, truth, and reconciliation, whatever the thing is, there has to be an open acknowledgement of harm. And in acknowledging harm, it's also understanding that, when you accumulate and preserve this adjacentness to power, it changes the power dynamics in community. And it makes trust really, really hard when you have someone and when you have institutions that have the ability to be oppressive and not allowing that community voice narrative to be amplified, and for there to be equal footing on what those resolutions can be for communities to actually thrive. I think when we rely on institutions to like civilize and stabilize community, you get the problems that we get because it's not actually honoring the strength that already resides within that structure and building up the things that work. And I think, a lot of, I think COVID exacerbated a lot of things, but a lot of the injustices that we've seen with the countless Black and brown women across the year, especially last year, is one of many, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Black and brown bodies that have had to go through that for us to get to this point of greater frustration and demand change in this particular way. Like when we say, equal accountability and equal footing is, one, to trust that community can have networks of kinship that work really well and have internal accountability for what that looks like. And then also the trust and legitimacy to be able to advise institutions on what they should be doing. And that's the most important part, you know, when we talk about what police and community relationships are, could be, I think we're beyond the point of recommendations and we're looking for very intentional actions that can change, that include and embed community voice in that process, not just, you know, at a community meeting every Thursday night before grandmas and the babies that they watch, but more so about like, as our justice or safety partner, these are the things that we need. And they actually have the capital to be able to put forth their solutions and then utilize other partners in the justice system to actually put forth the recommendations and or the actions that are prescribed by the community to them. A lot of times that process does not happen. It's normally a reactionary kind of plan or strategy after something happens, that there's this infiltration or this greater presence in the community that isn't necessarily coordinated, advised, and or implemented by the people who will be impacted by that most. So I feel like in order for us to kind of think through like institutional role, position, you know, contribution to the space, is recognizing its adjacentness to power and how sometimes those structures take away the ability for a community to be a part of that power structure, for there to be shared power, for there to be shared reciprocity, because that does not happen all the time. And I think it's nice that we're actually able to get to that point, but it'll be even better once we actually do it.
Right. I 100% agree with that. And I think that our community, I think we have to look at this like, and I hate to say it, but it's true, an abusive relationship. We're in a relationship with our abuser, and not any particular police department, the institution of policing, because the age that we live in now, even if we live in small town USA or wherever people might have decent relationships with their police department, we're able to see playing out in real time the abuses inflicted on people who, you know, I was reading an article about Elijah McClain today, and it talks about his mother and how his mother repeatedly watches the footage of what happened to her son because she wants to understand. She still feels a responsibility to her son. That's traumatic. That's repeated trauma. And then following the trauma, there's this gaslighting that we're all looking at it on video and we're like, what happened? There's no one that you can charge or nothing you can do to the person that inflicted this harm. And the rest of us lay people are like, how are you looking at the video that I'm looking at? And so, you know, I think that as we look at the consequence of our repeated voyeurism in that space, even as people who it's not directly happening to, the fact that we're seeing that over and over and over, for some people, maybe that dictates what you think your place is in the relationship. And so we expect, I think, when we do these community policing kind of initiatives, we expect people to come to the table willing to have these open and honest conversations about how to move forward, when we haven't done anything to address the abuse that we've endured in the past and that we currently continue to endure in many forms, even as bystanders or not direct victims of the behavior and of the practices. And so it becomes challenging. And when you have folks who feel disempowered, going back to my abusive relationship analogy, it's like you have folks who will say, well, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just do this? Why don't you just do that? Well, I don't have the resources to do any of that. And I'm dependent on this institution for a certain level of protection from an environment that was created by the fact that there's lack in the community and there's all these other systemic issues. And so it's like a cycle that we can't get out of. And so to Jessica's point, you know, for us to be able to come to the table to feel like an equal partner in this relationship of bringing change to the institution of policing, it's going to take a level of empowerment for people to even feel like they have ownership over something like that, that they have the ability and the propensity to change that. And it has to be equal on both sides. There has to be a willingness to change and a desire for it to be changed. I don't doubt that we can get there. I think we can get there, but it's going to take individuals who understand that as a philosophy, who are willing to acknowledge past harm. And then it's also in our behaviors. You know, a lot of departments are speaking the language about, you know, getting to know the community and centering the community. But when you look at the folks below the brass, perhaps the people who are getting promoted. If officers can look at the jackets and profiles of those officers and it's still the person with the most arrests, person with the most stops, the person who, has all of these, the city has had to pay out all these fines because of abuses or pay out lawsuits. If those are the people who are continuing to get promoted, then we're saying one thing out of our policy mouth and doing another thing out of our agency actions. So
I think growing up in Walt Whitman houses in Brooklyn, late 80s, early 90s, when we talk about police, and I mean, my relationship with police growing up wasn't the best. And I think when we look at where we are today, the changes that we are making as a city, a department, and as an administration, I think we have to acknowledge the changes. We're not there yet, and I think we are in a police department time, which, again, growing up in the police department, I never heard the police department say, we're open to reform. We're open to discussion of this. We're open to having those kind of conversations. This afternoon, the police commissioner was up in Harlem. He made a statement talking about the history of policing and the negative effect that it had on people of color. We never had that before. And I think I have community leaders calling me, and again, not to be oblivious to the fact that there are communities that don't trust the police, and we have to acknowledge that, we have to fix that. But we also have a community of leaders that are calling me for more police. They want more police in their neighborhood. They want more, so I think also too, there is that distrust factor there, 100%. We're not gonna say that doesn't exist, but we aren't where we were years ago. And I think we have to acknowledge the great work that's being done and being able to say, well, what are the next steps on how we get there? But I think the police department acknowledging that, hey, we were wrong with stop, question, and frisk, right? We were wrong with the previous, but let's now move forward. So I think, acknowledging that there are communities that do want police. And again, they want to know their police. They want to be able to work with police. A lot of our cases are solved because community leaders feel comfortable to call our officers and tell them. So I think there is some relationship. There are problems there that we need to fix, but I think, again, working together, I think we are making some big gains on that.
So I will say that to the credit of the police department, one thing that you mentioned was the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed. There's two memorandums of understanding that was signed. One regarding reducing the CCRB's backlog of body-worn camera footage, so that we'd have a faster way to be able to make sure that we gain access to body-worn camera footage so we could investigate claims. And then the other more popular memorandum of understanding was regarding the disciplinary matrix and understanding that the police commissioner would try to stick to the matrix as much as possible so that when we make these recommendations regarding police accountability pertaining to police misconduct, that there will be a lot more synergy between the two agencies. So that's one thing I can say that we could definitely acknowledge. And I think that from the agency standpoint, the level of cooperation now that we've seen is way better than the cooperation that we may have seen in years prior. So that definitely is a step forward towards getting to the space that we absolutely need to be. As everyone mentioned, and as we all know, there's definitely still ways to go. And I'm not going to say that every community is exactly the same. Some communities want more police. Other communities say, you know what, maybe we can handle it on our own. But nonetheless, I think the overall goal in the sense of this transformation, that we want to take that fractured, harmed, really tarnished relationship and put it to a place where people literally are back to a space of feeling comfortable, relying on their police department to say the things that you're here for, we would like you to be able to do, and we'll trust you to do it the right way. So in the sense of transformation, I think that's a big sense of transformation, especially in Black and brown communities where healing is going to be a part of that conversation. Always accountability is going to be part of that conversation. And then that level of interaction that we're going to need going forward to say that the policies, the conversations that we've had are actually working. You know what I'm saying? And I'm hopeful that that's the direction that we're going in, and that hopefully that will be there sooner than later.
Yeah, and I also think, to your point too, and I agree with what you said, and I think we are at a place now where I think communities are telling us, hey, how do they want to be policed? You know, do they want us there? Do they want a car parked there after a shooting? You know, what does that look like for them? I mean, I think we are having those discussions. We're having it with young people and, you know, community leaders. I mean, I think we're at a time where we are, in a sense, like asking the community, okay, if you don't want us enforcing that, you know, what do you want from your police? How do you want your police department to look? We have the city council reviewing a lot of bills. We have the, you know, about reimagining how the police department's going to look. So I think those discussions are definitely happening. And again, in my lifetime, I never seen a department so engaged in that process.
So I have a different perspective on this, I think. And I just to, you know, I give my background. So I grew up in Central Harlem in the 80s. You know, my first interaction with a police officer was, you know, a gun pointed at me, you know, falsely accused of being a drug dealer. You know, had that happen 3 times. Also had a gun pointed at me 3 times by people who weren't police. So I certainly get this intersection between public safety and civil rights. And I've kind of, that's been my career. I'm a civil rights lawyer and I'm a former prosecutor. But I hear you, you know, the data bears it out, right? Stop and frisk is down, but the racial disparities persist. And so I feel, and I'm, you know, I just speak very personally now, right? I was first stopped around, you know, 15. I got a daughter who's 15 now and a son who's 11. And I don't feel much better about their prospects in terms of getting stopped. And I was, you know, on 145th Street last week with a group of kind of Cure Violence group, Black, mostly men. There were a couple of women in the group from like 15 to 25. And I asked, who's been stopped by the police? Every single hand but 2 went up. And then we talked about the feeling, and it's just that energy in that room, even though, you know, certainly there's, I credit everything you're saying in terms of, you know, what the commissioner said today I didn't see and other things, but it is hard to have that feeling in that room and to feel like there's been change that is rubber hits the road change. So I feel in some ways, in many ways, that gut feeling that's in your stomach when the police are, you know, half block away from you, I think it's hitting people harder than when I was 15. In some ways, when I was 15, it kind of felt like, well, this is just, you know, like we didn't know any different. This is what happened. Whereas, you know, I think now we are in a movement where talking about that is good, but the trauma is going back to what Renita was talking about, like the trauma and the harm and the feeling in the room of, I mean, my heart was breaking. And it's not like I was learning anything new. I asked them to raise their hands because I kind of expected that answer. But, you know, many of them have said this was the first time they were talking about having been stopped because it wasn't something they wanted to talk about because, you know, they didn't want to feel like, you know, they didn't want to, you know, so show a quote unquote softness. So I feel like we're at a moment where we can really lean in, but that, you know, we really need to lean in. Otherwise, that feeling in that room, that to me is the prevailing feeling among our youth today. And it's not far off from how I felt when I was 15 in my sense.
Yeah, I think that's the critical part. No community is a monolith. Like you're going to find differences of opinion and experience, no matter, like if you're looking for it, you're going to find it. And I think that that's the important part that we have to keep in mind when we're having these conversations. And Jessica and I in our work are in conversation with community about these issues all the time. And I think that a part of the challenge is, like, do we give credibility to the voices that are saying the uncomfortable things and the things that we don't want to hear about where we are? I think America as a culture, we like to, some of us like to compartmentalize the things that are like our ugly, dirty little secrets to be things of the past. Like that's how it used to be, but it's not like that anymore. When really, if you just peek a little bit under the covers, you'll see that we haven't really done as much as we think we have to move the situation forward. And I think that is pretty prevalent when you're in conversation with young people who are not perhaps the, you know, straight A or college minded or however you want to describe those young people. And even those young people, you know, I'm from South Central Los Angeles. I've had the experience with a college degree from UC Berkeley, top public institution in the country, and a woman, of being put on the pavement, taken out of a car by LAPD and put on the pavement. So, it's like you can have that experience no matter what your background is. But I know that when we're in conversation with young people who are deemed to, not be a good kid, and we really have to stop the good kid, bad kid thing. But when it comes to this, we know who the good people are. We know who the bad people are. We're going to talk to the good people and get their opinion on where we are now and ignore the opinion of the bad people because they're, whatever descriptors we've used to put them in that category, now they aren't deserving of our attention to their experience or our empathy to their experience. I think that that's part of the challenge. We have to go where it's uncomfortable to hear the voices of people who may not necessarily agree with us or who are saying things that don't jive with the experience that we want to have. And it's okay that we want to see it be better than it is. But in order to actually get there and achieve that, we have to start with the reality of today. And I think that that's a huge part of, I was so struck in the spring and summer when there was so many new people in the conversation about the institution of policing in the Black community following the George Floyd murder, the killing of Breonna Taylor, and what happened with Ahmaud Arbery and the involvement of institutional actors in that situation. There's so many people who are like, I didn't know that. Well, who are you in conversation with? Who are you in community with? Who are you going to understand these issues? What are you doing to educate yourself? And once you are educated, what are you doing with that information? So for us, I know Jessica and I, and our work is very important that we build the capacity of the people who live in community, not just that we're representative, but that everything that we know, there's somebody sitting in one of these impacted communities that know what we know. So that when I move on, they still know who to call when X, Y, and Z happens. And they don't feel like they need me to make that phone call for them. It's critically important that we leave these things behind.
Yeah, I was thinking, I grew up in the Bronx, Lambert houses, late 80s, early 90s as a teen. Back then, probably daily, would run from either the Tactical Narcotics Task Force or the Street Crimes Unit. At one point, quickly lost all respect for police. As a teenager, lost all respect. Had a life-changing event happen. One of my friends was killed, gun violence, got shot and killed. That night we started a youth group. I'm the president of the youth group. And I found myself going to the precinct and found myself engaging the police and bringing them into community events that we designed and that we controlled. And that, back then when I was a teen, I felt like everybody was reporting to me. And they were kind of reporting to me in some aspects. And it was a change. I grew a respect for police officers who were in my neighborhood at the time in the Bronx, in Lambert houses, and them supporting the work that we were doing. And I wonder, and this may be us, not on this call, outside of this call, but meeting to start to figure out how do we connect some of those dots again. And I'm reflecting back to an event that we held out in Far Rockaway with the Child Center of New York at Beach 41st with Deep Gulch and folks from Child Center. A sleepover, a sleep-in the community center, young adults, the precinct officers, and they were just in that community center all night, brainstorming, meeting, talking. Again, that's one practice that a lot of really good things came out of. But I wonder if this is not, or if this is the right group for us to meet offline outside of the barbershop. And of course, we can bring back to the barbershop, at least meet once and figure out what it is that we can do that's innovative, that's different, that calls out the discussions that have to happen, and also calls out some movement that has to happen as well.
I like that.
I want to jump in real quick. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, no. Woo, so much.
Yeah.
So, keying off of what Daryl said, it made me think about something from my childhood. And I'm really keying off of what Renita said before. Like, as actors within institutions, we have to challenge the lens that's being used and the language that's being used. You were talking about like good and bad members of the community, or good and bad victims, or as Scott was talking about, we use particular federal funding that's to alleviate conditions of poverty. So you have to resist notions of like the deserving poor, which means there are other poor people who are not deserving of help. Like there's a lot of craziness going around all of that. And we don't always talk about the national political stuff, but like looking at things that happened earlier last month and how people will want to rewrite narratives describing what is happening when we have two eyes and we can see certain things that are happening. But I remember when I was in high school, I started being very active in my church in Bed-Stuy, and the rector took me around the court of the 79th precinct to talk with the police. There was no formal speak out program. It's just like, I need you to talk to this kid, and this kid needs to talk to the police because of whatever the prevailing notions he thought there were about who the good kids or who the bad kids are. We have to bust up. I live in Bed-Stuy. Like, I mean, whatever you're gonna do, you could be doing to me, you could be doing to someone else. Like, what is it that you're trying to do? And I mean, I'm gonna shut up a second, but one thing I want to say, and I'm glad we're having this conversation with a particular lens and focus right now, but I've been buttoning up my lip for a while because some of the stuff Jessica was saying before and Renita was saying before, I realized how universal these dynamics are when we talk about institutions. You can look at police and criminal justice, excuse me, as public safety actors as having enjoyed a particular kind of control and leverage and access or whatever. But I keep remembering conversations I've had, even in the past 10 years. Scott may remember some of these conversations when we tried to reach out to faith-based institutions about partnering with some of our work. And just anecdotally, some of those conversations I recall them were, oh, great, we would love to partner with you. But the subtext is, as long as you fit into the box the way that we do stuff. And we try to turn it around, let's have a reciprocal relationship. You couldn't get followed with people. And I mean, I'm a churchgoer. I have a lot of other active associations with faith-based institutions, sure. But I remember, and I don't forget those conversations. It's the same sort of dynamics that relate to power. And so I'm interested. I want to give it to you, Jerry, but I also want to ask the panelists to return in the way Renita was a moment ago. What is some of the work that you're doing that is really focused on voice and amplifying voice from the community so other people are getting their toolkit, how to really challenge those structures and those institutional actors and say, well, ostensibly you serve me, on the face what you do is serve me, but I need you to also hear what I'm saying right now.
I think, Mike, you actually that was a perfect lead for me because so I have an Afro-Caribbean mother. I love her to death, right? And so she's one of those mothers where you would bring a gift. Matter of fact, I'll take it back to, I don't know if you all remember the plastic covering in the sofas and no one can go in the sofa, right? Like, she's one of those mothers, right? And I would every time I would bring a gift to her, whether it was something for the kitchen, she would say, oh, this is so beautiful. And she would store it away. And so to this day, she has like a closet full of gifts that I've given her. And I remember telling her, hey, like, why aren't you opening it? She's like, nah, I need to save it because I never know when I'm gonna get it again. And she had this mindset of, not to say that she didn't deserve good, but she had to save or harbor anything that was good because she didn't have a place to actually deserve it and display it. I use that anecdote simply to say that a lot of times, going back to what Jessica said, I love is sat on the entire time, capital, right? I think the richest capital is relationship and resources. Unfortunately, NYPD is like the bottom of the phone system, and the expression of a lot of systemic issues comes with a direct conflict with different issues that may arise with NYPD. But all this, when you add in gerrymandering, when you add in voter suppression, when you add in all these other things, now you have this bottleneck, and it shows itself in law enforcement, and they get like the brunt of this heavy lift. And I going back to my mother, I had to, one, know that it was going to be incremental, and two, let her know it was okay and really be that additional voice. So even now, I take that same concept. Man, if it wasn't for after school programming, I grew up at the time where Major David Dinkins really started the after school program. If I did not have after school programming, I have no idea what I would have done because I had nothing left to do with my time and I wasn't in the best neighborhoods, right? How do we extend certain levels of capital? I think it was Renee who mentioned it before. I have this amazing platform at the job where I get to support community centers. And yeah, there are reports that say, hey, what are the numbers that we're hitting? but I appreciate that I'm a part of a unit and a part of an agency that's trying to impact people and not trying to make numbers, right? What does that look like across the board? And so raising that level of capital, raising that level of voice through whatever platform you sit on, especially as a city agency. So yes, there are parts where we can say there's trust and healing that has to happen, but that is a collective effort across all, right? I realized that I was the voice of my family, in particular my mother. How can I be the voice of my community, in particular my neighbor? Like, you don't even need to go that deep to be like, hey, all of Brooklyn. How do I just be the voice of my block? How do I get on my district board to make sure that I'm more influential than sitting by another situation that I may not be privy to or simply don't like? So when we talk, going back to the overall question about transformation, I think it's a whole mind shift that comes. And in that, now you're sequencing, hey, we're having these conversations with NYPD. Oh, wow, we're having these conversations with lawmakers and senators and district leaders to help put in things that fit my community. Because like we said earlier, not every community is the same. So our needs may look a little bit different, but at least our voices are being heard.
So I want to jump in real quickly because I want to check in with our folks on the chat. Renita, you're getting a lot of love on the chat line. So we may have to open up a chair for you in this barbershop. But you get a lot of love. But from my technical crew on the behind the scenes, you have any questions you want to throw into the mix real quickly? If not, I'll keep it going. But Renita, yeah, I think you see that chair over there, Renita, right there. That's your chair. That's your barber chair now. So, but I guess one thing I want to start pulling things together, and I always wonder. Well, let me back up first. I don't know. I went to a training with the People's Institute, and it talked to us about as government workers being gatekeepers of the community, good and bad gatekeepers, and understanding where you are on that realm of the work that you're doing. Are you really speaking and listening to the community, or did they hire you to keep the community at bay?
I think I was in that training. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Because when they did that, I was in the training. I had to go leave the meeting because it hit me so heavily that are you really working in the community like you wanted to, or are you being paid to keep the community at bay? And it's a hard conversation to sit back and think about your day-to-day work. Are you really supporting and hearing what the community needs are and using your skill set or your ability or your popularity, however you got your position, to make that connection, that true connection between the community? Are we really able to do that? And I know at times it's hard, but I see you, Jahai. I know you want to jump in and go. I see you got your hands and everything. He said he needed space because he's going to be doing hand signals. I got you. I saw it. I saw the hand signals. Go ahead and throw it at me.
So there's a couple of, I'm sorry, was somebody else going to go?
No, I said you started ramping up and amping up. I was watching.
So when I first got to the CCRB in the outreach unit, I think my energy was like, for everybody that I personally believed needed to hear what I needed to hear when I was 13. My very first police stop was 13 years old, right? Walking down the street on Sutter Avenue, East New York, Brooklyn. And my cousin knew more about what to do when they're stopped than I did, right? So a part of me selfishly really wanted to be a part of this agency so that I could give back to those communities what I needed when I was 13 years old, not understanding what should have happened when I got stopped by a police officer. So I would say in working for the CCRB, I have been able to put this spin on how we relate this information to members of the public that I believe would have been transitional for me as a young person. So like we've even created, so when I first got to the CCRB, a lot of the outreach was, go to a community board, get structured presentations with nonprofit organizations, work with student organizations, educational institutions. So then my energy is like, but we might be missing some folks. So, I was able to create a partnership with the Core Services homeless services, so that we'd be able to go in homeless shelters and conduct literally a string of presentations for those that may be stopped by police officers on a very regular basis. In addition to that, we found out, I was notified that MAP existed, and now I'm back in my own neighborhood in Boulevard houses, back in Brownsville houses, Tilden houses, Howard houses. And now I'm working with these organizations because despite the fact that I used to live in Eastern York, my cousin used to live in Brownsville, and I spent all of this time in Brownsville. You get what I'm saying? I'm literally back at my old high school teaching people about what they need to do if they're stopped by the police department, by a police officer. So I'll say this, that the information might not always be information individuals want to hear. And I wish that I'd be able to say more. But I would say to the core of me, I do believe that when I have these conversations with members of the public, when we have this method of picking and choosing who we're going to be able to get in front of, the neighborhoods we're going to be able to relate to, I feel like we're doing what's necessary to be able to give the public what they need and the tools that they need to be able to hold police officers accountable for misconduct. That's just me, though. But I do wish I could say a little bit more. I wish I could say things a little bit differently sometimes, but we do have a little bit of latitude to be able to say it the way that it's relatable to members of the public, and to give them some of the tools that they need without doing too much and getting ourselves into trouble. So, and I'm animated when I talk. So if we were in person, my hands would be everywhere. So I'm animated when I talk. So when I do my presentations, I'm the exact same way. I want you to feel what I'm saying by watching my actions and hearing my words and hopefully understanding my passion.
Jessica, you're muted. You got to open your mic. Go ahead. Jessica, go ahead.
Sorry if I had an intense stare. I was trying to look at the question in the chat. But I think I want to take a step back and kind of reconnect to the theme of narratives, right? And how that narrative is very, very important on just kind of guiding the overall perception of, one, how we do our work, how it's informed, and also recognizing that, yes, we are government actors, but we are sons and daughters of the communities that we wish to support and that we do support through our work. So one, there's just kind of phrase of the consequence of a single story that, there's this novelist, Chimamanda, talks about, and it kind of goes like, it robs us, people, of our equal humanity when our differences are pointed out. And I think our single consequence in all of this is violence, right? Whether it's economic, emotional, physical, and conditional in how we see those things being played out. So a lot of our roles is really about understanding the power that narratives play in that and how it changes people's perceptions and societal perceptions, and not only how they interact with us, but also the community at large. So a lot of what we do is recognizing that, particularly in like a criminal justice frame, care work is not just, deeply engendered to just be about women caring for community. It also creates a space, and that's what we've seen through many, many different credible messenger and mentoring movements, is that there's a role for everyone to play, especially those that have had touch points in the criminal justice system, to be a shepherd into the network and services that we have. I think when we kind of think about the crisis management system as a whole and the work that we do, it's really preventative and proactive, right? How do we create the first chance for individuals, because the second chance was never really given? Being able to talk about economic mobility and have access to jobs, to talk about the different relationships that people have with therapeutic services, right? I'm still licensed, but I don't practice at this time. But my experience of a lot of Black and brown men and women in the therapeutic process was punitive. It's because they have done something to show that they are deemed or marked and worthy, and now have to go through this program for 6 months to show that, again, this institution can civilize them in a way that allows them to reconnect to their children, that allows them to not be violated and go back into the criminal justice system, that allows them to have, basic liberties that we all, just on a basic humanistic scale, should be able to access. So I think the programs that, well, not even the programs, the institutional lifestyles that me and Renita really tried to embed through our work by leading from behind is, one, recognizing that community is leadership and community comes first. And thinking about all of the roles, actors, players, and yes, community does have to have an acting relationship with any institution and or leader in their community, because leaders should be able to speak to other leaders. Leaders should be able to find resolutions. And in that, again, I connect it back to access to capital, because a lot of resources, whether it be access to their homes, access for food, access for benefits, access for all the things that make communities thrive and have an ecosystem that works really, really well, is about how they're able to have that and be trusted with that, and also allow that to be able to be an avenue and a mechanism to not only amplify their voices, but also their actions. I mean, procedural justice calls for there being an amplification of voices in community practices, but I also think that, again, if the resources aren't there for people to show up and respond well, for their like voices to be manifested and to really and true intentional actions to support what we do, then we have nothing. So a lot of the work that we do is focused on recognizing that healing not only comes from these Freudian approaches of sitting down in a chair and telling someone your life problems that could get you violated, but really about recognizing what are the foundations of community, like kinship, like spirituality, like mindfulness, like eating well, like that all contribute to how we live and thrive in our self-care and in mental spaces. So access to legal services, access to jobs, access to real kinship and mentorship that can connect you to where you need to be, and just an overall system and network of support. Because the reason why our communities are so disproportionate is because we lack that. And we lack that in a way that has continuity. And although we've seen strength over time, there's always opportunity for growth, and there's always opportunities for us to do it better with community.
If I can jump in to add to that, I think I do also want to take a little step back and talk a little bit about my work, because I do feel like it's very much on the topic of community transformation. As most people can probably imagine, working in government in this sort of role, it isn't always easy, but I love the work that we do, and I love my team, because I think it's so important. I just want to start there with the team first. I think it's so important that when you're the purpose of MAP, the initiative that I run, MAP was started in 2014 with the acknowledgement that crime in New York City was going down dramatically. It's not the same city from the 90s, as many people have reminded me, because I'm not from here. So we've seen tremendous change and progress in that regard. And by all means, like we talked about, many of the crime or criminal justice indicators are trending in the right direction, but the disparities persist. And I think we see that very prevalently in public housing, where my work focuses. And MAP was started because even though the city was getting progressively safer, there wasn't much changing for the residents who live in the public housing developments we serve. And if you look at a map of, poverty and all of these other social health, physical indicators, if you map that on top of crime, it pops in all the same places, because we know distress concentrates in place. And the outcome of that, as Jessica said, is violence. And so, the MAP initiative, I think, had a very ambitious goal to try to increase safety and well-being in communities by addressing the underlying needs that communities face. We can't complain about the police responding to everything if we put all of our resources in that bucket and they are the only ones empowered to respond. They're the only ones that are there. So we have to create this other infrastructure to be able to respond to the things that are really not their job. They don't have the training to deal with all these things, and they shouldn't be. There should be other people responding to these sort of issues. MAP is the Mayor's Action Plan for Neighborhood Safety. I'm sorry for those that don't know. And so what MAP did was bring a bunch of other city agencies to the table, which is how I know nearly all of you, to work together with the police department, with the housing authority, with DYCD, and with a number of other agencies to, one, deliver targeted services and supports to residents, but also to be at the table and in communication regularly and in communion with those residents in partnership to change the situation in their neighborhoods. And the reason why I love my team is because this started out as a crime prevention initiative. There's no police officers, on my team, no people who have some specialized crime-related background. It's a team of organizers, folks who have expertise in public health, urban planning, designers, architects, community engagement specialists, defense attorneys. It's a really powerful and diverse team, both in background and in professional career. And to me, that's symbolic of the fact that the outcome that we want is to help support people in those areas. And so we're putting a team of experts around these residents that we work with so that they have expertise to pull from. Oftentimes we put folks into these situations where we're like, okay, tell us what you want. And we get into like community town halls and things like that. And it feels like we need more jobs or we need something non-specific. And yes, we do. But I think that it's important that we give residents the tools and the vocabulary and the language to understand this policy process and how decisions are made and how resources are stewarded. Other communities know these things and the government works for them. And it's important that, to my point earlier about getting in these seats and disseminating the information, MAP and our main initiative, Neighborhoods, that is all about putting residents together with government actors, policymakers, big P and small p, so that they understand what that process is like. It's a very clandestine backdoor thing. City agency folks in their offices, wherever they might be, come up with stuff that the community then is on the receiving end of, but oftentimes not on the front end, on the planning end. And so we really want to try to change that. And I think that plays a tremendous role in community transformation. If you just look at some of the work that we've done with the Housing Authority, NYCHA has a backlog of repairs and disorder that's in the billions, unfortunately. And that's the history of disinvestment that residents are dealing with. But through our work together, we teach them we put them in the room with experts who understand urban planning and placemaking and design, and help them envision what they want to see their physical space looking like, because that affects how people treat the community pride that they're able to have. And so those residents know how to get, how do you get a permit to do a mural or a garden or an event on your block? How do you, get past all the red tape needed to do these community events that encourage cohesion and folks working together and getting to know each other? All of that stuff has an impact on crime, but it's the little things that we don't necessarily think about when we think about how to make a community safe. But the people who live in those communities are thinking about that. Thank you guys for letting me
you get first chair now.
Thank you for letting me suck up oxygen.
Hey, listen, when the information is good, we sit back and enjoy it. We'll just give you the first chair.
But you guys have all done this. We've done it together, and I think I think it's great. I really do.
So one of the questions I saw in the chat is talking about how do we bring uncomfortable conversations into real systems? How do we really bring those uncomfortable conversations to the community where we can really have uncomfortable conversations? Anyone?
I think collectively, right? I think for the most part, what we've noticed is that when the general public says it's time to talk about this, the general public speaks for those that then represent the general public. So if you want to have an uncomfortable conversation, you have to have the requests for an uncomfortable conversation loudly. You have to make sure that those that are the gatekeepers on our end, and that's when I say our end, I mean the government end, are in a space to be able to really say, you know what, they're serious about having this conversation. So I think you have that, you make it loud. So I think we've done that before in the sense of like when everybody, like literally the noticeable thing is that we're talking about police accountability for last year, right? Because of all of the occurrences that happened over and over and over again. Now, every individual that wants to be heard has to include a conversation about police accountability in order for them to be heard, because the public has spoken. We need to have this conversation. We need to have it differently than the way that we've been having it before, and we need to have it until we don't need to have it anymore. So I think to bring that to the light, just loudly. And if that means organizing, getting a group together, being on more conversations like this, finding that power structure and saying, listen, you're going to listen to me. I think that's a means for you to be able to have that conversation and make sure that it's had in a way that's respectful. And then be finding that means to be at the table when that conversation is being planned.
Jai, we had so we have these staff conferences in our entire agency, and we had the pleasure of having Jennifer Jones Austin do our keynote at our staff conference. And she left me with words that I'm able to put together what I've always known. And she said, bring your whole self to the table. Like, so, and I acted that way. I've always moved that way. And she helped me put it into better words. You get me, and this is an acknowledgement that I'm going to bring the difficult conversations that I'm having with folks out in the community. I'm going to bring that to the table, whether it's in the city hall bullpen and the voices getting loud or wherever it's at, to make change and to recognize that this, whatever that item is going to be acknowledged, and hopefully implemented, right? Sometimes it's not implemented. But yeah, but just the intentional acknowledgement that we are bringing our whole selves to the table, and that comes along with everything that we're privy to, everything that we know, our experience, and the real discussion on what needs to happen.
Wow. Anyone else? Because I know sometimes even in our workplaces, it is hard to strike up that uncomfortable conversation. And I know at DYCD, we're working very diligently of being able to open up this dialogue so we can have those uncomfortable conversations. And one thing that always strikes me is, yes, you know, those people who want to have these uncomfortable conversations are usually at the table. It's the ones who we're having conversation about who are not at the table. How do you get them to the table so at least we can hear why their thought process, whatever it may be, is that they think this way, and maybe we can help resolve some of their anxiety or their lack of knowledge of what's happening either in the community, as me as a people, or whatever it be. But how do we get them to the table? Because frankly, I always think that it's just us at the table talking to ourselves.
So I mean, I don't find uncomfortable conversations uncomfortable. They're necessary conversations because without them, we can't advance our work, we can't advance our humanity, we can't advance our well-being. I think, work in Renita collectively with residents and with advocates across the city, I think the biggest stickler is the need for action. People are tired of having conversations because the same issues that are prevalent right now have been prevalent 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And it's just like if there isn't any intentionality about action and actual changing the way that we see policies, particularly around supporting our human service, contractors, like if there isn't intentionality and real deliberate action around changing some of the practices that we see, then yes, you will be met with the same pathologies. Yes, you will be met with the same trauma that people have because they're not being heard. And because they're not being heard, they're not being seen because they're not seeing any actions from the things that they're requesting. So I feel like a large part of our work is really around transforming government's approach to how they engage with community voice and what they do with it. Because again, if you look at the proverbial structures, right, it's the patriarchal approach, you know, I'll come in, I'll ask you to do all these things, and it's a hurry up and wait approach. And people are tired of waiting. And in that wait, what festers is frustration, what festers is hurt, and what festers is, the constant, as Renita said, voyeurism of constantly watching different stories play out of people being victimized in ways that could have been prevented if there was one, intentional investments, and if there was two, intentional action to support that. So we do that every day in our work. So not uncomfortable, very, very necessary.
Anyone else? Because we have to have these conversations, and once again, we have to get the the necessary conversations. Let's say it that way, and we're getting some movement. One of the other things I was just hearing is like, well, what is the community agenda? What's the new agenda? And I'm kind of tired of hearing that also because I don't even know what is the agenda. Where's the agenda? We're talking about. Well, we have this new agenda. What agenda? We as Black folks, well, where's the Black agenda? I don't know, maybe somebody on the call can tell me what is the agenda so I can get aboard, because I want to be part of the solution. I don't want to be part of the problem. So if somebody can help me understand that, how, if we're going to transform these communities, where's the agenda so I can get in and play my role?
I'm just going to key off of some things that Renita said earlier, this idea about my words right now, but and I'm gonna get it wrong, but I remember the concept of like language and labels. You know, there's not good, bad, these kind of people, the other people. You know, like if we're in positions where we have some access or some leverage, there should be a set of principles and practices where we hold up, where we're talking to members of the community, constituent groups of the community, and say, here's the institution, or here's the policy, or here's the system, and be listening actively. Is it working for you, or is it not working for you? And challenging in ways we can pull off challenging some of the prevailing approaches, like what Jessica was talking about a moment ago, right? If you have this patriarchal, hierarchical, you know, people kind of do a quick flyover, a flyby, and like, yeah, everything seems fine. I'm gonna keep it moving the way that I'm used to keeping it moving. If there's no access to really hear, receive feedback, and be able to respond, you're just reinforcing, and it's business as usual. You know, so there's a bunch of stuff I think Renita pointed to about who she and her colleagues bring to the table, to bringing folks to the table. Or, you know, I could say what I think we do, what I think we try to do, and in being part of a network of community action agencies, there's a thing that we advance. It's not just about here's some money and we regrant some money to provide social services. We keep going back to this principle of maximum feasible participation since 1964, whatever, when Lyndon B. Johnson said, we're going to create anti-poverty programs. The idea is that people who have, or coming from the community, I don't want to say poor people, to me that's an outdated way of saying it. That's probably how he would have said it. People from the communities get to say how the money should be spent, what the intervention should be, whether it's working. So we have all these things designed to try to support and partner with the community. How we do business is as important as just that we're doing business. You know, so that agenda gets set collaboratively if you are listening and you are able to respond to what, you know, actual people in your community are saying the agenda needs to be, rather than one singular static agenda.
Right. I agree with that notion that the agenda is going to shift from neighborhood to neighborhood. I think the agenda is going to be, or the perception of an agenda is very specific, right? What might be for the Southeast Queens neighborhood might not necessarily be for the South Bronx, and what may be for the South Bronx may not necessarily be for you know, East Harlem. The individual conversation becomes, collectively what we're asking for is a seat, to be respected, to be serviced, as previously mentioned, like the way that we're intended to be, the way that we're supposed to be treated by our government, the access to resources that we're supposed to be provided, that in collectively becomes a holistic agenda. But what that looks like definitely changes from neighborhood to neighborhood, because not everybody's neighborhood and composition are the same. Not everybody's individual core values of what a great quality of life specifically are. All everyone knows is that we want an acceptable, good, or great quality of life, but that could look different from neighborhood to neighborhood. So I would say the agenda are to be treated like people, like respectable people. Like, we want to be treated as such, but I don't think the agenda is a specific list of things that an individual will be able to break down to anything more tangible than treat us with respect. We want to be treated as though we belong here. We want to be treated as though we're welcomed here, and we want to have the ability to thrive the way everybody else can in the society that we live in. We want to feel part of the society. So I think that's collectively what I would perceive as an agenda. Anything more definitive than that, you got to go block by block, bro. Oh.
Yeah, I don't even know that the specifics of the agenda matter that much when it comes to government. I think people's frustration with government is the lack of imagination. Like, we just want to do what we've always done, uninterrupted. Let me administer my little program, and that's it. You don't want that? You're not satisfied with that? Then go talk to somebody else. And the challenge with that is, like, my frustration as an executive director of a program that's multi-agency, and like, you got to deal with all these people, is like, if I'm coming to you with a problem that residents brought to me, help me get to yes. The first thing out of your mouth and in your mind shouldn't be all the reasons that you could say no. Vision with me, dream with me. We're asking people to envision a community that they want, and then we refuse to dream with them. It's like, oh no, you can't do that because X, Y, and Z. Tell me what I can do. Don't tell me what I can't do. And I think that is why people get so upset with government, just the lack of vision, because it's definitely in the community. The community has vision, but we have to get with it.
We got to move faster and keep up with the community, and
Absolutely.
don't slow down. So
Move faster, but also really mean it.
yeah,
Like really be willing to move at all. I hear what Renee is.
I mean, that's a part of the reason why we put residents together with agencies, so that they can say to them, like, you hear the resident idea. You're not in the working group with them to tell them what their idea should be. You're there to tell them, well, that's going to take X amount of time, but if you did it like this, maybe we could do it faster. There's no rule against doing it like that. Let's move it forward. You're there literally to help residents strategize. Like that's how
the community already has the answer. We just need to help them implement it.
Yes.
So and that's always a problem. We slow the process down. By the time we get to helping them with the answer, there's a new problem, or they've kind of resolved it on their own in some fashion also. Jessica, you were going to say something?
Being able to support like the imagination. It goes back to where the money resides. Like that community, but that's right. And that's on Mary Had a Little Lamb, okay? Like it's about community. It's about, I love that guy. It's about community investment. And again, whether that's investment in capital, whether it's human capital, whether it's, the capital of our thoughts and ideas, like those things are always necessary. And that's the connective piece that regardless of what the agenda is, the ability to be able to move and implement resources are extremely important. And I think without that, we have kind of these circular conversations where nothing is able to be accomplished because we're not able to move the capital in a way that empowers people to actually be doers and also thinkers in that space. So, I think that's the main thing that's important.
I have a question for you. Now we spend more money per capita than anybody else as a people. And when all of our money leaves our community, how can we start being honest and investing in ourselves, in our community? So our wealth goes, I think they say our wealth goes maybe not even a half a time around before it goes back out to community. So I like what you're saying about investing in it. And we shouldn't always have to wait for government to invest. We spend enough money to invest in ourselves. So
but it's also, but again, right? It's very layered. You're talking about how people are socialized, and also like what that looks like in consumerism and capitalism is the base of what those things are. Like, talking about investing, when I'm talking about community investments, I'm talking about government's investment in communities. And what that looks like is empowering Black and Brown led organizations to be able to be at the forefront of implementing these things, and not like the nonprofit industrial complex of these larger social service organizations that have the capital to be able to yield to the city's procurement system, which is reimbursement. When we're talking about investing in ourselves, and yes, like the money continues to go out because of consumerism, but think about the way that people are socialized and how that socialization connects back to what that adjacentness to power looks like to them. The ability to be able to spend and achieve those things gives people the image to believe that they have adjacentness to power. You take that away, and yes, you can have like this collective bargaining of people coming in together, but it comes from one, recognizing the value that we have within each other, and then also like creating the space for that to happen. And again, when we talk about people coming together and people mobilizing, it is a historical fact that when large bodies of people, particularly people of color, come together, it is perceived as a threat. So those systems are disrupted. So it's not that we lack the ability to do that, it's that when we do, it's about educating the institutions that oversee and fear the mobilization of those people to be able to come together in that way. Like, we have to be honest about that.
Or would you say some of those institutions are not really fully at the table? They may send us as representatives, but they're not at the table here firsthand.
No, they know the issues. They don't need to
Yeah.
be at the table. They're a part of the societal plight that we have. Some institutions are a part of the problem. It's not a lack of knowing. It's about the audacity to do better. And what we see in all of these like protests is the outright call for humanity to be respected without abandoning what their cultural or people's cultural identities are. And we know that is the piece that has been disrupted because there is fear in what like the strength of the connectivity of people who are marginalized can become. Like that's a real thing. So it's not about just like people not being at the table. People are aware and people are at the table, but they choose how they show up to the table, and that's the problem.
And then Scott, the one thing I'll add on is, and I love that, Jessica, they choose how to show up to the table. They also choose how they show up when they leave the table. Like, what conversation are you going back and having? And I get it, because trust me, I've gotten to what I believe is trouble for pushing, and everyone thinks I'm crazy. But what conversation are you having internally to make change, to do something different, to do something out of the box? I'll shut up.
Well, I was seeing in the chat, somebody put one person, I'm not gonna say the name, but put empower people to hold the government accountable. And that's something that we really have to do, is help empower our community to hold us accountable to get what they need. Any comments?
Yeah, that's 100% facts. I mean, look what happened last summer. All kinds of local policies and orders and governor this, city council that popped up all over the place just by the sheer strength of the number of people who took to the streets and said, we're not going to take this anymore. We don't have to only exercise that power when we're being traumatized. We got to exercise that power year round. Like, folks want to show up for the general election, but not the city council election or the local so-and-so. We have to do that as well, because that has the power to have even more of an impact on your day-to-day life than what, Joe Biden and my good sis and so Kamala Harris is over there doing. What the people who are directly in your community, your local representation, that matters, I think, more than folks in our community know. That's why there's so much time spent gerrymandering and disenfranchising folks and putting up fines and fees for formerly incarcerated people. If we weren't as powerful as these folks know that we are, there wouldn't be this many institutional barriers to doing something as basic as voting. And I think that we do definitely have to really highlight the franchise and how important it is, and how important it is to exercise at every single level. Like, I can't stress enough, and I know it's cliche, but people died for it. And it's powerful. It has the power to collectively move us forward.
So
I agree with that.
I hate to be the wet rag, but we got to get ready to wrap it up. We're coming into that landing, and without even understanding, 2 hours is gone right now. And I know we're trying to pull it all together. So I don't want the folks to leave still hanging. I want to be able to help them leave with maybe some steps to say, well, this is how we can start transforming the community. And I would hope, and I want to, give everybody the opportunity to give your point of view. What can we leave this audience saying? Here's an opportunity to help start doing some transformation, however they see it, however you see it. And so we're going to start with the ladies. And Renita, since you have first chair, I'm going to let you go first.
Well, okay. My thing would definitely be, I don't think we talk a lot about giving voice to X, Y, and Z. I mean, we don't have to give people voice. They have voices. We have to encourage them to use it in the areas that matter. And I think, my last point of just about civic involvement, whatever level that's at, you got an issue with something that the police department is doing in your community, they have plenty of forums where you can tell them that. Go to Build the Block, go to your precinct council if that's what you want to do. Ask to be on the agenda. Some things in your community that you feel is not funded or should be funded, The individuals who control that are just that, individuals. They are people, human beings with blood running through their veins, sitting at a desk somewhere between you and the decision that you want to be made. There's nothing stopping you from accessing that person. And so I think that these little things that feel like mundane, perhaps not as important things, they are. And I think that there's ways for us to show our collective ability to change policy, to transform our community, to move things forward. But we got to band together to do it, whether that be letter writing, campaign, phone banking, whatever it is. We have to be involved in the civic process because we are a part of this country. We are woven into the fabric of this country. And, you know, we are the seasoning in the melting pot. So I think that it's important for us to you know,
I should have made you go last. Let me
sprinkle it on in, Salt Bay. That's us.
go ahead, Jessica.
You know, I think in recognizing that in the structure that we have, you know, everyone plays a role in what our public safety looks like. Mike says Salt Bay. Everyone plays a role in what that looks like. And one resource that is tangible that I would like to leave viewers or folks that just want to take up on the offer is access to our Safe in the City grant. We know that there's a lot of dope individuals that are in community that their heart, passion, and spirit is just about the betterment of the people overall. And we want to be able to fund you. We provide small grants from $500 to $1,000. We don't require you to have a 501c3. Just show up as your best self and show up doing the work that you've been doing for the community. So it's called the Safe in the City grant. You can reach it at www.nyc www.nycgov./peace-nyc. To be able to apply, we understand that supporting and holding space for our community isn't something that happens one time in a year. So you can apply up to 4 times and be awarded up to 4 times in a year, because the overall sentiment and fabric of all of this is ensuring that community is empowered and actually having resources to be empowered to stand up to things that they want to see in community is very important. So we ask you all to join us, not only in standing up for peace, but also to be a part of the accountability mechanism that's needed to ensure that we do our work well and that other institutions do their work well.
And we put it in the chat, so those who want to get it, we got that, Jess. We put it in the chat. Let's see. Alvin, you wanna?
Yeah, I would say starting close to home, right? We talked about a lot about sort of the vibrancy and the supports in our communities and how much is there. And so in terms of an actionable deliverable for people who are listening, I think about kind of my own, service outside of work. It's like I started teaching Sunday school because it was like the 1 hour during the day where like during the whole week where my whole family could be together. Like I knew we would all be. And, I'm still doing it. Or I started coaching the Harlem Little League, which didn't exist when I was a kid growing up, because my son was playing. And those kind of banding togethers, and we've been talking about how government can, help. The network is already there. Folks are doing the work. So if you don't see the need, by all means, jump in and create it, do something new. But something that maybe just, like really right in front of your eyes that maybe you do just get involved because help your own kids, right? Or help who's right next to you will strengthen these structures. And I think a lot about, what we've been talking about is what government can do really has got to be about complementing that. And so often when I've seen, 15 years of government service is government trying to recreate the wheel and supplant it. Like the network and the resources are already there. So I would say do what is close to you that drives you, it's your passion. And then as others have said, continue to push government to meet us where we are.
Thank you. Jahan, go ahead.
So I think the overall overarching conversation is, feel a part of the solution. So in the event you're in a neighborhood and you feel like something is not there, create it. If you feel like something is there and it's not working enough, support it. But nonetheless, feel a part of the solution. So the only advice that I could really give is that if there is something that you feel needs improvement, be a part of that conversation in any way that you reasonably can be a part of that conversation. So if it is letter writing, if it is pounding the pavement and being on the ground, if it is something is making a phone call, showing up, but when you show up, just make sure that you're in the nature of realizing that it's to make a difference. Pertaining to police and community relations, to some of the suggestions that were made, build the blocks, precinct council meetings. The CCRB also holds monthly board meetings, sometimes special board meetings. That's also another avenue for you to be able to speak directly to the CCRB's board. So you can notify us directly of issues that may be taking place that maybe we need to do better at, and maybe where also the police department needs to do better at. But those conversations are spaces for you to be able to have your voice heard to those individuals that review cases of police misconduct on a daily basis. So get involved, be a part, and recognize the progress so you can make more of it.
Brother Foster.
Yes. So again, I know many people talked about the Build the Block meetings, which is in the chat. The community council meetings. We also, all of our precincts and also our housing commands, we all have our youth leadership councils for young people as well. That's being run with our youth coordination officers and all the precincts to give young people a voice. We're partnering with New York City Service under the mayor's office with that. We're rolling out next week with all of our commands, having a youth leadership council to help young people have that voice. But I think, again, you know, as far as the department NYPD, we are reforming. We want to reform. Looking at public safety as well is our main issue here, being able to see how we can continue to keep people safe, but also make those necessary reforms is important. But being at the table, coming to those precinct community council meetings is very important because the commanding officer of the precinct is there, or his or her number two, which is the executive officer. So it's important to come to those meetings. And many times, you know, folks in the community don't want to talk to the police officer. They might want to talk to a supervisor, but all of the key players in that command is going to be at those meetings. That's also in the chat too, where you can locate your local precinct, your local Build the Block, times and contact information.
Wow, Daryl, Mike, Jeremy, this was an awesome conversation. I mean, I think we have a lot to build on to move forward. Guys, how are you all feeling after tonight?
I feel energized. I always do, but this group, you know, like I want to put everybody in my pocket or do another session next week or something crazy. We got to hold on to all these people.
This group is amazing.
Yeah. I would get in trouble in the office tomorrow if I didn't say, closing out of a conversation about transformation of the community, I got to do a plug for the neighborhood advisory boards. We have a structure right here at DYCD. Right now, there's 41 neighborhoods where we target services around the city, and we're always looking for volunteers. So, you know, David, you can put that in the chat too. It's probably already in the resource link, but it's all about doing needs assessments. It's all about helping DYCD figure out how to spend some of DYCD's money, making sure we're targeting where the greatest needs are. And we know those needs change over time. So we're always looking for neighborhood advisory board members. And you can be a member of your police precinct council. You can be a member of a community board, and you can still be an NAB member. So, you know, I have to always do that plug too. But just so many uplifting things said. And each panelist, we talked a lot of theoretical stuff, but everybody brought it down home to things that you can do right now. If you're in the city of New York right now, you probably just got hit with about five or six different things that you or a neighborhood or your brother, your cousin, or somebody can get involved in. And I think that's what we're always trying to do.
Jerry?
Oh man, I think Mike summed it up. All I want to piggyback on something Renita said. It just resonated with me very well. Continue to imagine, dare to imagine, keep pushing that bar further up. In order to create that form of transformation, you have to level up in your imagination and what that looks like in curating your voice so that that impact can be felt. So I just leave the table with that, man. Continue to have those, I don't even want to say uncomfortable conversations. I would say the needed conversations to spark the change that you want.
Brother Daryl.
Oh, it's a lot. I would quickly say, I know we're stressed for time. Everybody, anybody, speak up. I don't care if it's small conversations, large conversations. I think the aim is to take back our community. let's unite. Whatever we bring to the table, we bring it collectively, and let's do our part. Do what we can. So wherever we sit, wherever we stand, we do our part.
Wow. So in closing, just want to make sure that we all take a interest in our communities and we all have a part to play in it. And we want to make sure that we're all playing the best part. Because if you're going to have a transformation starts with the person in the mirror. That's the person that has to transform first. If that person in the mirror doesn't transform, how do we expect the community to transform? So with that to say good night. We'll be back in the month of March. Once again, always the last Tuesday of the month here on the DYCD YouTube channel. We'd love to have you. We'd love to hear from you. If you have some suggestions, make sure fill out the survey at the end, or David, I put up, you can take a screenshot and you can fill out the survey, or you can send us information to DYCD and we'll be happy to get your information and read it. Folks, what can I say? Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we're going to go ahead and drop off our YouTube channel, and we're going to have our guests stay on for